The last chapter is built on the work of Professor Campbell, who was a mythology specialist, and David Pearl, who is a British artist who brought together the work of Dr. Campbell and others and applied it to business leadership. The reason why we use it in the last chapter is that it is fundamental for change leaders to use the myths, the stories, the symbols as a strong support to the change effort in which they want to take their organization. Dr. Campbell traveled literally around the world collecting heroic stories and came with that conclusion that it seemed to be the same person who was behind all of the script of those different stories. What does that mean for business? Well, it seems to indicate that if there's one thing human beings, whatever their corporate or national culture, have in common, is recognizing what makes the stuff of a hero and what makes another type of behavior not so heroic. Dr. Campbell found 17 initiation stages, and that's way too many for the business, but there are some which we find fundamental for business leaders to understand. The first one is the call for adventure. The call for adventure, Joseph Campbell was explaining, is not usually taken by the heroes. The heroes are careful and they pay attention. So they do not accept the call for adventure right away. They will eventually when the call becomes emotionally engaging as well as intellectually compelling. So the first lesson for leaders is to understand that they need to find the intellectually compelling and the emotionally engaging for their people to remove their barriers to change. And that skepticism of the followers is not necessarily a bad thing. They're just normal human beings who want to be heroic but who need to have the fertile ground to be so. The second step, once we have moved from what we call uninformed optimism, accepting the call, to informed pessimism, is crossing the threshold. Crossing the threshold is much more difficult. That's when the hero understands that they will need to let go of some of their personal and organizational winning formula. The best example of that is the movie Matrix, the famous moment between blue pill, going back to the ordinary world, refusing the change, red pill, you're gonna go through shit, but you will know. So that is the second lesson for the change leaders. What is it that they personally, what is it that their leaders, what is it that their organization need to be ready to let go, because their previous winning formula becomes the dead weight that brings them under the water. The third step is rather an enemy, the nightmare, the nemesis that the hero will be encountering when crossing a solid threshold. It is fundamental to understanding that the nemesis is something we contributed to build. Luke Skywalker nemesis is Darth Vader. What is the nemesis? What is the shadow? What is the nightmare of your organization? What is your personal nightmare? This is the third lesson for the leaders. What are the deep blockages? What are the deep fears, the unspoken fears of their people that they need to address and let out and deal with when a major change is underway? Finally, the fourth component rather than a step, Joseph Campbell used to call it the bliss, we call it the deep intent. The deep intent is what the heroes and the organization can rely on to support them in the major change, to guide them when they've lost their way. The deep intent is our deep motivator, and the best image I can think of is the beginning of the Gladiator movie when, before the last battle, the general daydreams of his family, his wife, his farm, his son, back in Spain where he left them. And we discovered during the movie that his deep intent was, go back and live with my family. Maximus accesses his deep intent, digs his deep intent, because that's where he's going to find the energy to win the last battle. That's the fourth lesson for change leaders. They need to understand what drives them. They need to reconnect what drives them deep inside with the new change ahead. And they need to do the same with their organization and their people. Give them the time and space for them to be able to reconnect, reconcile their personal deep intent and the organization's deep intent with the change underway. This is the key message of Chapter 6.